That's 73B. And we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines from the bottom. It starts with Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Rav Yosef is the Amira. He says, Nakaita Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef biyadcha. Accept what Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef says. Why? The Rabbi bar Chana Koi Kavasei, because Rabbi bar Chana holds like him also. So what did Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef say? Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, yesterday we learned that he says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that even though when you shecht an animal that has a limb hanging off it, we said that the shchita oisen nipol, that the shchita does not make it nipol, that the shchita covers it. He said that the shchita covers that limb, and although you can't eat it for whatever reasons, but it's not considered like Aver Menachem, like a limb that was taken off the animal while it was alive, even though it's mostly off. But it's not considered that it's entirely off. The shchita makes it that it's still part of the animal, and the shchita covers it. Even though we say that, but if the animal died without shchita, then we would say the reverse. We would say that it's not considered that it's a limb from a dead animal. We'll consider it a limb from a live animal. So it's always the lenient side here. That's what Rabbi Bar Yosef says. If it's shchita, we say that it's considered attached and the shchita affected it. If it just died, we say that it was considered detached and the death did not affect it. It was off the animal before it was, because it's halfway on, halfway off. So we take the lenient side for both. And Rabbi Yosef says you should accept that opinion because Rabbi bar Chana also agrees with it. Okay. The Tanya, as it was taught in the Brisa. The Brisa quotes a pasuk, and then Rabbi bar Chana is going to explain the Brisa. So it says, "Ubasar basad sheif alei sechelo," that meat in the field, torn, you shall not eat. Lahavi aver v'habasar mededalim bebehema v'chaya v'oif. This is coming to include a limb or flesh that's dangling off an animal, or a wild animal or a bird, b'shachtan, and then they were shechted, shehem asurim, that they're forbidden. Sounds like the opposite of what we said, that the shechita doesn't help them. Ve'amar Rabbi bar Chana am Rabbi Yochanan. However, Rabbi bar Chana explains in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, ein behem ela mitzvos parish bilvad. There's only a rabbinic rule, injunction, that we should separate ourselves from this.
Mitzvah parish means?
To separate. No, just don't eat it, but it doesn't mean that it's forbidden. Parish is like, just refrain. To refrain from it, but it's not a real daraisa. What about the pasuk? We quoted a pasuk. The pasuk is coming to include that. The pasuk is an asmachta. Asmachta means that it's a scriptural support, but it's not actually what the pasuk is referring to. It's possibly a way of remembering the halacha, because people would remember the psukim. So this alludes to something. Okay, we're on the top of 74. Top line. Yosef Rabbi Yosef Kameder Rav Huna. Here you have Rabbi Yosef and Rav Huna. Now, I don't know if it's really this Rav Huna. From Rav Huna seems to be senior to Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef is here, Rav Huna is here. From the conversation, we'll have to see if that's actually what it is. So, V'Yosef v'Ka'amar. And Rav Yosef was saying, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Achlu lazeh loike. If someone eats a limb that's dangling off an animal, gets malchus. It means it's biblically forbidden. He didn't explain what happened here, but he just says, if you eat this, you get malchus. Amalei Hume Rabbanan, so that one of the students there says, Leitatzitzulei. 74. He says, don't listen to him. Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Shmuel, Hachi Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Shmuel Bar Marta Mishmei de Rav. We have another statement from Rav Yitzchak Bar Shmuel Bar Marta in the name of Rav. Achlu lazeh ein alaika, that if you eat this dangling limb, you don't get malchus. Amalei Rav Huna says, Anana man nismach. Who am I supposed to rely on? It sounds like Rav Huna is not the senior of Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says a halacha, and Rav Huna is asking, who do I rely on? This must be a second Rav Huna, which there are. There is another Rav Huna, not on the chart, but it must be a younger Rav Huna that's there.
But he did say he was sitting in front of him, like a Talmud.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay. So Adrina Rabbi Yosef Lape. Rabbi Yosef gets angry, and he turns his head around. So Amalei my kusha says, what's the problem here? Ki Amri no, what I was talking about was Bemisa Daisinipol. When the animal died, I said there's malchus. So the animal died. There was no shechita. And there's malchus. The limb was dangling. So what, the malchus for what? He says malchus for Ever Menachem. That's what he meant to say. That he considers the limb removed from the living animal, which has certain leniencies, as opposed to the limb removed off the dead animal. And Kiyamar Iyu, what he was talking about, that's Beshchita, Deinais and Nipol. He said there's no malchus, that's because it was shechted. So it's interesting that this should even come in here, because this has to do with shechted or not shechted. This doesn't have to do with nipol or not nipol. But Rashi spells it out. No, there is a din of nipol here, because how do you get malchus? You have to be warned for that specific aveira. And here he was warned for Eva Menachai. He wasn't warned for nevela. So there's malchus specifically because of that aveira of Eva Menachai, and therefore it tells me that it was considered detached before it was shechted. Amar Rava. Rava says, Menachem milsa damar Rabbanan, misa isenipol, shchita ina isenipol. This is already like accepted. That from where do we know this? That the sages said that when you shecht it, it doesn't make it considered detached, but if it dies, it is considered detached before the death. The Ksiv quotes a pasuk, "V'chol asher yipol alav mehem b'maisam yitma," talking about the shratzim. If a sheretz falls on something else, it becomes tameh. The pasuk says, if the sheretz falls on it in its death, it's considered tameh. Lemute mai. What's it coming to exclude when it says that extra word in its death? We said before, minivlasam, from their carcass. So it doesn't have to repeat again in its death. So, Eily malamute b'chayayim, if it's coming to exclude while it's alive, that a sheretz, this creeping creature, doesn't give off impurity, minivlasam nafk, it already says in the carcass. Elashma mina, it's coming to teach me something else. It's coming to teach me, b'maisam, from its death, that misa isenipol, that the death makes it fall off. That the death makes it considered as if it fell off beforehand. Ve'in shchita isenipol, but the shchita doesn't make it considered like it fell off. The Gemara says, Amalei Ravada Barava, the Rava, Ravada Barava says to Rava, do you have Ravada Barava on the chart?
Did the death, is he saying that the death situation caused it to be as if it fell off, or is he saying that physiologically it was dangling by a living thread, so to say, a living tissue, and then once the animal died, there was no blood supply, then it died and fell off?
Problem is, it's half and half. It's half on, half off. So we could consider it like it's attached. We could consider it like it was already off. So what we've been saying is that if it dies, then we consider it as if it was already off beforehand. Beforehand, which means that this is a limb that was removed from it's Eivim and Achai. If it was shechted, we consider it attached, and the shechita was effective on it. So it's like the lenient side of both. That's what we're saying here. The Gemara. So Rav Barav asks Rava, "V'hakra b'shratzim ksiv." What are you telling me over here? A difference between death and shechita. We're talking about these creeping creatures that have no shechita. So Gemara says, Amalei, the Rabbi responds to Rav Barava, we're going to use the Imeina Yinyan rule. Imeina Yinyan means if I have a rule that's learned out of something, but it's not applicable to what it's being learned from, so I apply it to something else where it is applicable. If it's not relevant for this, so so apply it to something else, and so by shrotzim it doesn't work, but it works for other things that need shechita. The Gemara says vakatimi ba'ilei, but that word b'maisam we actually use for something else. When will a sheretz give off tumah? Ke'en misa, it needs to be similar to its death, which at that point, it's lachim, it's still moist. Mitamin, that's when it gives off impurity. But yeveshim ein mitamin, but if it's dried out, it doesn't give off impurity. A fossil wouldn't give off impurity. It's already dry. So Gemara says, trei b'maisam ksivi. It says twice b'maisam. You have to look up the psukim, but okay, it says twice b'maisam, so one of them is going to teach me that if it's totally dry, that it doesn't give off impurity. The other one tells me that the misa makes it as if it was detached before, not by the sheretz, but by another animal, and it's considered that a limb off a living animal as opposed to shechita.
Is there a time that defines being dried? I mean,
I don't know how dry. Usually the Gemara discusses how dry, but this isn't the main sugi. The Gemara will say, will it crumble with the fingernail, or did it turn white, or like in lulav, it has like the different measurements of how dry. Okay.
It says it's saying when it says when they're dead, it's written twice. One in this pasuk and once in the previous pasuk in 31, which says whoever touches them when they're dead should be coming until you.
Okay,
What's that
very
mean?
good.
If you shoot it again to make sure it's dead?
No, I'm just saying that
The double expression of its death. To teach us two different halachas.
Oh.
I was saying, we have to look up the psukim. He says, no, it's one pasuk right after another. Amar Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda says, Machlekes be'ever de uber chai. The machlekes that we had this is machlekes Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, I guess. That is when the animal is shechted. Does it say machlokes for Rish Lakish, or it says machlokes? Dispute between Reb Meir. No, go back to the Mishnah. It's a machlokes between Reb Meir and the Chachamim, where Reb Meir says that the limb that's sticking out gives off impurity, and the Chachamim say that the limb that's sticking off does not give off the impurity of nevela. It only gives off the impurity of a treifa, and we said that's relevant for kudshim, that there's impurity there. So Rav Chizda says that machlokes is only if the fetus is alive. You shech the mother, you open it up, the fetus is alive, but there's one limb there that was sticking out. Aval be'ever de uber meis. But if the limb that's sticking out is part of a dead fetus, Divrei hakol shchita is a nipol. Then everyone holds that the shchita makes it as if it wasn't part of the animal and it's nevela. Whereas everyone would agree with Reb Meir. That's Rav Chisda's statement. But Rabbi Amar k'machlekes bazeh kach machlekes bazeh, that the machlekes is exactly the same. Rabbi's explanation would be that, look, if I shecht the mother, and inside is an animal, alive or dead, the shechita helps it. Doesn't matter. So now there's a limb that's sticking out of it. So is that limb nevela or not? So Rabbi says that the sages would say the same thing, that it's not nevela. The shechita helps the dead ubar, it also helps the limb that's sticking out. And Rav Chisda says no. Rav Chisda says that the limb that's sticking out is totally dead. That's for sure nevela. So he says that there's no machlekes. Now it's interesting how we can go through the whole Gemara. This was such an obvious issue, and we didn't even come up with that difference. However, if you remember in the Mishnah, Rashi gave two interpretations for the Mishnah. When Reb Meir says that habasar is magen avela, Rashi's first interpretation is, well, the basar is considered aver menachai, which gives off impurity like an avela. Second interpretation is, if the fetus is dead, then that limb is an avela. So the second interpretation of Rashi is explaining Rabba's explanation that there's a machlekes here between Reb Meir and the Chachamim. If the fetus is dead, if that limb that's sticking out is an avela. The two interpretations of Rashi is really two interpretations in the Gemara of Chisda and Rabba. To clarify, Rav Chisda and Rabba are contemporaries of Chisda and Rabba. So these are two interpretations of what Rav Meir's opinion is, or what's reality. Rather, they're arguing about what the sages would hold. Because do the sages agree with Rav Meir if the uber is dead? Okay. Start a new piece. Ben Shmei Nachai. Okay, this was a little bit complex in the Mishnah. We went through a whole conversation between Reb Meir and the sages. The Mishnah then went on and it said that how do we know that if you shech the treifa, it doesn't give off impurity? That the shechita benefits the treifa, the animal that was going to die, even though you can't eat, but it benefits it that it doesn't become impure. So we said maybe we should compare it to a non-kosher animal. If you slaughter a non-kosher animal, remember that story with the girl that was sick, that the doctor said that she needed to have a pig, so she was very frum, so she said, I'm not going to have it unless it's slaughtered. So they convinced the shaykhah to use his knife to slaughter the pig. So she said, okay, now go check the lungs. So they went to check the lungs. They found that it wasn't kosher. So there was a problem in the lungs. They brought it to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, look, if it would be a cow, it's not kosher. But in a pig, maybe a pig can live with the... So here, if you shech the pig, if you shech the non-kosher animal, is it considered like it's pure because you shecht it? Of course not. So the same thing with the treifa. Treifa is a non-kosher animal. You shecht it, it shouldn't give off. It shouldn't become pure. It should give off impurity. So then the Gemara says no. A non-kosher animal never had potential to be shechted, but this, before it got sick, it could have been shechted. So we said, okay, so 1 second, what about if it's born sick? It never had potential either. So we said, no, well, let's not do that comparison. Let's adjust it a little bit. A non-kosher animal doesn't have in its species shechita potential, but a kosher animal that's a treifa, its species could be shechted. Then the Gemara concludes, the Mishnah concludes and says, what about an animal that's born in its 8th month? For some reason, we're going to consider that like a different species because it's for sure going to die. That was the assumption, that an animal that's born in its 8th month is not going to survive, or the equivalent to the 8th month in the human. So, if you shecht one of those, it's going to be impure, as if it's a non-kosher animal. It doesn't have its type. Now we go to the Gemara. We said in the Mishnah, the language of the Mishnah was ben shmeina chai, a living 8th month animal. Ein shchitasim mitarasei. The shchita doesn't purify it. Lefi she'ein b'minei shchita, because its kind, its type, doesn't have shchita, because it's not going to survive. There's no such thing as shchita in it. The Gemara asks, v'hatanya, but it was taught in the Bais differently. Ben shmeina chai yechiach. Let the ben shmeina chai, a 8th month animal, prove she'af al pi sheyesh b'minei shchita, that even though its type does have shchita, this is very different. Ein shchitasi mitarasei. The shchita doesn't purify it, so the law is the same, but we're using it as a much stronger proof. We're using it to prove that the shchita should not purify a treif animal, even though its kind does have shchita, because I find by an 8th month animal that its kind also has shchita, and it doesn't purify it. Amar Rav Kana. Rav Kana explains. What that Bais was talking about is yesh b'minei shchita agav imai. Yes, its kind has shchita. How does its kind have shchita? If you find it in the mother, when you shecht the mother, that's the shchita, affects the uber. But not that you can shecht. Not that an 8th month is actually a kind of animal as a 9th month. No, they're separate animals. What does it mean its kind has shchita? Shchita works for it if it's found inside a mother, as a fetus. V'tana dinah.
Well, why say 8? It's 7, the 6.
Yeah, the 7. Actually, we believe a 7 would live. It's the 8th which is the issue.
Okay.
It's not just the premature. It's the. I don't know the explanation. I'm sure that someone looked into it and has some sort of explanation for that.
No, because it's just like with a neonate. I mean, at a certain level, there is a chance, because if the immature lungs to still maturate, etc., mature. But if much younger, it's not viable. It can't live. So it's saying by a cow or calf at 8 months, there is a chance it could live. And if it came out, it would just be a premature calf. And the question is whether you could check it. But prior to that, it has no chance whatsoever.
Well, there's a inconsistency in Kedushin about determining father with regard to fatherhood of humans.
Okay.
For 1 month, it's possible there could be the father, but the month before and the month after, not. And there's really no explanation that's satisfactory to the modern mind.
See, because you follow what's going on. The issue is that in the 9th month, that's full term. The 8th month, that's premature. It's not going to survive. In the 7th month, there is a type of birth that's viable in the 7th month. So what happened to the 8th month? That's the issue here. So how to satisfy that? Okay, so the Tana of the Bais holds that the mother shchita is effective on the 8th month birth. The Tana Didan mina deime leiparach. But our Mishnah, Tana Didan, our Tana, he doesn't ask about the shechting of the mother. Ulahai Tana de Parach. What about the Tana that does ask? The Tana de Bais that does ask. How could you say that the shchita is metara treifa? Because its kind has shchita, but in 8th month also its kind has shchita, like its mother. Its mother shechted, it gives the shchita is good. So from where do you know? Treifa the shchitasa metarasa minale. How does that brisa conclude? It doesn't tell me. How do I know that when you shech the treifa, that the animal is pure? Gemara says nafkalemi de Rav Yehuda Marav. He needs a different source. He learns from Rav Yehuda Marav. The Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav. Rav Yehuda says the name of Rav. Rav is up here. Rav Yehuda is here. Rav Yehuda. Very early source. And some say that it was actually taught in a brisa. That makes sense. That you could be confused like this when it's a statement from Rav. But Amrila is always like, we're not sure who said it. And some say that has a different source. Usually it's like a teacher-student that you would have this question. Some say that this was a brisa. Amar Kra, Pasuk says, V'chiyamus min ha-behema. And if it will die from the animal, miktas behema metama, miktas behema ina metama. Sometimes the animal does give off impurity, and sometimes not. And ve'ezu, zu treifa sheshachta. When does it not? This is a treifa that's shechted. So he has a source, because it says when an animal will die, from the animal it will die, it means that not all animals that are going to die are going to be tamei. If you shech the treifa, it's going to purify it. So he has a biblical source. By Rabbi Hoshia. Rabbi Hoshia asks a question. If someone sticks his hand in to the stomach, or to the womb of the animal, b'shachat ben tes chai, and slaughters a 9-month-old fetus.
Inside.
Does a shchita inside. He must have X-ray that he can see where the knife is going. Yeah. Or he just did whatever he wanted. He takes it out and says, hey, what do you know? It's shechted.
Kisui hadam.
Not so wild. They do heart surgery
right.
in the womb.
Yeah, but they didn't think by having technology 2,000 years ago.
Kisui hadam. How's that supposed to work?
Theoretical with it.
Well, if an animal, we don't have to do. On a bird and a wild animal, you would have to do. So, mahu. What's the din here? Tibayla Rab Meir v'Tibayla Rabbanan. It's a question according to Rab Meir and a question according to Rabbanan. The reason why Rab Meir is coming in here, Rab Meir had the story with the arm sticking out, but Rab Meir has another opinion. Rab Meir holds that a 9th month, a full-term fetus needs shchita. The sages held the shchita requirement is only after it's born. The age of it doesn't matter. Reb Meir says no. Once it's full term, it requires shchita. It's only less than full term that it doesn't require shchita. So here we have a full term, so it really does require shchita. But this way, the question is according to Reb Meir, and the question is according to Rabban, as we'll see. Tiboiler Reb Meir, there's a question according to Reb Meir that Ad kan lekam Reb Meir ben Pekua tarn shchita. When does Reb Meir hold that a ben Pekua, that this fetus requires shchita? Hanimili. These words are said. That's after it was born. But in the mother's womb, the shchita doesn't permit it. I know it requires shchita, but who says that the shchita works until it's born? I know he says that you can't eat it with the mother's shchita. That doesn't mean that the fetus's shchita works. Or you could say differently. Afilu l'Rabbanan, even according to the rabbis, that the mother's shchita helps. So what are you doing over here, shechting the child? The shchita of the mother is what's required, not the child, not the embryo. But maybe dalit samana machshabei rachmana. The Torah gives you the option of cutting 4 different pipes, which means 2 and 2. You can cut the mother's trachea and esophagus, or you can cut the child's trachea and esophagus. 2 types of shchitas. 4. It calls it 4 because you have 2 and 2. Amar Rab Chanina, or Rab Chananya. Rab Chananya says, Tashima, Harish and all the treifa min habeten. Our Mishnah, we asked, from where do you know that if you shecht a treifa that it becomes pure? So we said that, should we compare it to a non-kosher animal? He said, no, a non-kosher animal has no potential. He said, let's compare, look, but a treifa has potential, because you could have shechted it before it became a treifa. So the Mishnah went on, he said, let's say it was a treifa from when it was born. There's no potential there. It was born a treifa. So if you shecht an animal like that, would that be pure? So then we switch and we say, well, its type has shchita. So we quote this section of the Mishnah. Now, what are we talking about over here? Our question was, if you stick your hand inside the uterus and you shech the baby. We said that we're looking for an animal that has no potential because it's born a treifa. The imisa, but if it's born a treifa, it still had potential. Why? Because you could have shechted it before it became a treifa, before it was born, inside the womb. If we accept that shechita works inside the womb. So what are you saying? There was no potential there? Sure there was potential. You do in utero, you do the shechita in utero, there's potential. There was potential for it to be a shechita. Because he could have put his hand in and shechted it. Amalei Rava, so Rava responds that we can amend the Mishnah to perfect this issue. What we say is, Tani, teach it, shenoitzra treifa min habeten. Not that it was nolda, that it was born treifa, that it was formed treifa. I think this is what we understood anyway. But we were saying that no, it was born treifa, that when it came out, something tore in the animal as it was being born, not in the mother and the child. Now we're saying no. We're saying that the way it was formed with something wrong in the heart, or something that was mishkachas lababalas heraglayim. The example the Gemara gives is that it was born with 5 legs. It was formed with 5 legs. That can't happen at the birth. That was happening while it was in the uterus. And as Rashi points out, an extra leg is like a missing leg. And because a missing leg is considered a treifa, here it has an extra leg, so it's considered, it was formed as a treifa. This is an example of something that if you would shecht it, there was no potential, and nevertheless it's going to be pure. It's going to be pure, even though there was no potential of shechita in this animal, of eating it. But the shechita would help to purify it. Okay.
I'm sorry, it's just a side comment. Just thinking, in the old days when they had the side shows on the midway, the tents, with the traveling carnivals. Uh-huh. So the difference between Jewish thinking and non-Jewish thinking, they had these banners and it said, see the 5-legged calf, the 2-headed, this. Uh-huh. It was just, look at these anomalies, and people would just look. But it wasn't taken anywhere beyond that. Here, our Gemara, without seeing it,
1,000,000 halachas.
It's all halakhic. I mean, it's amazing the difference in how we handle the same situation.
Right.